In this video, we're going to be talking about arrays and how we might use them in Visual Basic. And so this begs the question, what is an array? An array is a specific type of variable in VBA that can store multiple values instead of a single value. So whereas a normal variable in VBA can only store one value at a time, your array type variable can store an entire list of values so long as they are the same data type. So for example, if we had a list of student names, John, James, Hannah, Connor, and Christina, we would have to create 5 separate variables if we wanted to store each of those values in its own normal VBA variable. If we created an array variable, on the other hand, we could store all 5 of those names at once and only require one variable declaration. So this kind of begs the question, how do arrays work? So arrays are going to first take your list of values that you're giving, turn them into a little list like it's shown on the right, and then turn each of those items into an individual item itself. So instead of having 5 separate variables storing 5 separate values, we can set up an array ahead of time to expect 5 values. It will create 5 separate little item boxes, and then as we assign those item boxes values, each of those items gets assigned its own number. So in this case, that array on the bottom has green boxes for John, James, Hannah, Connor, and Christina. All 5 of those names get their own box, their own value, but they all exist within the same array. They're separated by a numbering system, an indexing system that starts with 0. And that might not seem intuitive at first, but starting with 0 for indexing is pretty standard for all programming languages. So instead of counting from 1 and going up to 5 for our list of names, the system will start from 0 and go up to 4. And we'll see examples of this when we actually talk about using arrays in Visual Basic. But you can see here that we have a single array, it's a single variable, but we're storing all 5 items separately within our array. And that's why we like to use arrays. Arrays can significantly simplify the code because you can reduce the number of variables that you have to set up, the number of variables that you have to actually go in and store values to, and retrieve values from. Arrays are also a lot more flexible than a regular variable type. They can continue to grow. If we have a longer list, we can continue to add items onto that list. They can shrink if we need to shrink them later on. We realize we didn't have as many values as we thought. So in this table on the left, this green table, we can see if we were to use a standard variable naming system, we'd have to create 5 variables: student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4, and student 5. We'd then have to assign each one of those variables a value, and later in our code, we'd have to remember which variable meant which name and know which variable to be referencing at whatever time we need in our code. If we did this with an array, however, we could create one array variable. In this case, it would be students, and then each of those items in the array could get assigned a value. So it's one variable declaration compared to the 5 variable declarations that we would need on the left. And this leads into the difference between static and dynamic arrays. So static arrays have a preset size. That means they can only take a certain number of items. And we'll tell the system ahead of time, hey, this array that we're about to build for you, it's only going to have 4 items in it. Or you only ever need to expect 4 items. So static arrays are good for when you know ahead of time exactly how many items you're going to have in that array. But if you had a list and you weren't sure how long your list was, and you weren't sure if your list was actually going to grow or if it might shrink later on, you could use a dynamic array. And the dynamic array can, exactly as it sounds, grow and shrink as you add things or take things out. So in the previous examples, we had exactly 5 names. We knew how many names there were going to be. So we could declare our array as a static array, meaning when we declare the array, we tell the system ahead of time we're creating an array variable called students, and it's going to have 0 to 4, meaning 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 all as items within this array. And it's going to be a string type variable. That would be a static array. The system knows ahead of time, all right, I should have index numbers from 0 to 4, and that's the only size that this array should ever be. But if we were worried, for example, that we might have more students in the future, or that some of our existing students might graduate, we could set up that array to be dynamic, meaning it can grow and shrink depending on however many values we feed that array. And in this case, when we create the array, we just don't give it a size. We let the system determine the size as we go. So in this video, we talked about VBA arrays, we talked about how they work, why we would use them, the difference between static and dynamic arrays, and now we're ready to go ahead and take a look at how to use arrays in Visual Basic.